Mount Rushmore National Memorial is a national memorial centered on a colossal sculpture carved into the granite face of Mount Rushmore in the Black Hills near Keystone, South Dakota, United States. Sculptor Gutzon Borglum created the sculpture's design and oversaw the project's execution from 1927 to 1941 with the help of his son, Lincoln Borglum. The sculpture features the 60-foot-tall heads of 4 United States presidents recommended by Borglum: George Washington, 1732 to 1799, Thomas Jefferson, 1743 to 1826, Theodore Roosevelt, 1858 to 1919, and Abraham Lincoln, 1809 to 1865. The 4 presidents were chosen to represent the nation's birth, growth, development and preservation, respectively. The memorial park covers 1,278 acres and the mountain itself has an elevation of 5,725 feet above sea level. The sculptor and tribal representatives settled on Mount Rushmore, which also has the advantage of facing southeast for maximum sun exposure. Don Robinson wanted it to feature American West heroes, such as Lewis and Clark, their expedition guide Sacagawea, Oglala Lakota Chief Red Cloud, Buffalo Bill Cody, and Oglala Lakota Chief Crazy Horse. Borglum believed that the sculpture should have broader appeal and chose the 4 presidents. Peter Norbeck, U.S. Senator from South Dakota, sponsored the project and secured federal funding. Construction began in 1927 and the presidents' faces were completed between 1934 and 1939. After Gutzon Borglum died in March 1941, his son Lincoln took over as leader of the construction project. Each president was originally to be depicted from head to waist, but lack of funding forced construction to end on October 31, 1941. Mount Rushmore was conceived with the intention of creating a site to lure tourists, representing not only the wild grandeur of its local geography but also the triumph of Western civilization over that geography through its anthropomorphic representation. Though for the latest occupants of the land at the time, the Lakota Sioux, as well as other tribes, the monument in their view came to epitomize the loss of their sacred lands and the injustices they've suffered under the U.S. government. Under the Treaty of 1868, the U.S. government promised the territory, including the entirety of the Black Hills, to the Sioux so long as the buffalo may range thereon in such numbers as to justify the chase. After the discovery of gold on the land, American settlers migrated to the area in the 1870s. The federal government then forced the Sioux to relinquish the Black Hills portion of their reservation. The 4 presidential faces were said to be carved into the granite with the intention of symbolizing an accomplishment born, planned, and created in the minds and by the hands of Americans for Americans. Mount Rushmore is known to the Lakota Sioux as the 6 Grandfathers, Thukasila Shakpe, or Cougar Mountain, Igmathakapaha, but American settlers knew it variously as Cougar Mountain, Sugarloaf Mountain, Slaughterhouse Mountain, and Keystone Cliffs. As 6 Grandfathers, the mountain was on the route that Lakota leader Black Elk took in a spiritual journey that culminated at Black Elk Peak. Following a series of military campaigns from 1876 to 1878, the United States asserted control over the area, a claim that is still disputed on the basis of the 1868 Treaty of Fort Laramie. Beginning with a prospecting expedition in 1885 with David Swansea, husband of Carrie Ingalls, and Bill Shalley, wealthy investor Charles E. Rushmore began visiting the area regularly on prospecting and hunting trips. He repeatedly joked with colleagues about naming the mountain after himself. The United States Board of Geographic Names officially recognized the name Mount Rushmore in June 1930. Concept, design and funding. Historian Don Robinson conceived the idea for Mount Rushmore in 1923 to promote tourism in South Dakota. In 1924, Robinson persuaded sculptor Gutzon Borglum to travel to the Black Hills region to ensure the carving could be accomplished. The original plan was to make the carvings in granite pillars known as the needles. However, Borglum realized that the eroded needles were too thin to support sculpting. He chose Mount Rushmore, a grander location, partly because it faced southeast and enjoyed maximum exposure to the sun. Borglum had been involved in sculpting the Stone Mountain Memorial to Confederate leaders in Georgia, but was in disagreement with the officials there. U.S. Senator Peter Norbeck and Congressman William Williamson of South Dakota introduced bills in early 1925 for permission to use federal land, which passed easily. South Dakota legislation had less support, only passing narrowly on its third attempt, which Governor Carl Gunderson signed into law on March 5, 1925. Private funding came slowly and Borlam invited President Calvin Coolidge to an August 1927 dedication ceremony, at which he promised federal funding. Congress passed the Mount Rushmore National Memorial Act, signed by Coolidge, which authorized up to $250,000 in matching funds. The 1929 presidential transition to Herbert Hoover delayed funding until an initial federal match of $54,670.56 was acquired. Carving started in 1927 and ended in 1941 with no fatalities. Construction. Between October 4, 1927, and October 31, 1941, Gutzon Borlam and 400 workers sculpted the colossal 60-foot-high carvings of United States Presidents George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Theodore Roosevelt, and Abraham Lincoln to represent the first 150 years of American history. These presidents were selected by Borlam because of their role in preserving the republic and expanding its territory. The carving of Mount Rushmore involved the use of dynamite, followed by the process of honeycombing, a process where workers drill holes close together, allowing small pieces to be removed by hand. In total, about 450,000 short tons of rock were blasted off the mountainside. The image of Thomas Jefferson was originally intended to appear in the area at Washington's right, but after the work there was begun, the rock was found to be unsuitable, so the work on the Jefferson figure was dynamited, and a new figure was sculpted to Washington's left. The chief carver of the mountain was Luigi Del Bianco, an artisan and stonemason in Port Chester, New York. Del Bianco emigrated to the U.S. from Friuli in Italy and was chosen to work on this project because of his understanding of sculptural language and ability to imbue emotion in the carved portraits. In 1933, the National Park Service took Mount Rushmore under its jurisdiction. Julian Spotts helped with the project by improving its infrastructure. For example, he had the tram upgraded so it could reach the top of Mount Rushmore for the ease of workers. By July 4, 1934, Washington's face had been completed and was dedicated. The face of Thomas Jefferson was dedicated in 1936, and the face of Abraham Lincoln was dedicated on September 17, 1937. In 1937, a bill was introduced in Congress to add the head of civil rights leader Susan B. Anthony, but a rider was passed on an appropriations bill requiring federal funds be used to finish only those heads that had already been started at that time. In 1939, the face of Theodore Roosevelt was dedicated. The Sculptor's Studio, a display of unique plaster models and tools related to the sculpting, was built in 1939 under the direction of Borlam. Borlam died from an embolism in March 1941. His son, Lincoln Borlam, continued the project. Originally, it was planned that the figures would be carved from head to waist, but insufficient funding forced the carving to end. Borlam had also planned a massive panel in the shape of the Louisiana Purchase commemorating in 8-foot-tall gilded letters the Declaration of Independence, U.S. Constitution, Louisiana Purchase, and 7 other territorial acquisitions from the Alaska Purchase to the Panama Canal Zone. In total, the entire project cost $989,992 equivalent to $18.2 million. Nick Clifford, the last remaining carver, died in November 2019 at age 98.